It's great to welcome back to the program today Kelly Weill, who's a reporter at the Daily Beast and also author of Off the Edge: Flat Earthers, Conspiracy Culture, and Why People Will Believe Anything. Kelly, great to have you back on. I appreciate your time.
Thanks so much for having me again.
So, when you were last on about a year ago, we talked a lot about how people fall into conspiratorial thinking, how sometimes seemingly benign conspiracy theories don't sort of stand alone, and they're often wrapped up with other beliefs that can be more damaging. We talked a little bit about how we can get people to maybe revise some of their thinking. Over the last year, we've seen Twitter in particular change dramatically in terms of its enforcement and application of terms of service under the stewardship of its new owner, Elon Musk, and that's certainly had impacts. We've also seen platforms like Facebook and YouTube slightly change, if not their policies, at least the way that they implement or police the terms of service around conspiratorial or non-science based content. How would you kind of characterize big picture the direction that things have gone in these areas over the last year?
It's a good question. I think big tech broadly has been stepping away from some of the misinformation fears that really characterized around the 2020 presidential elections. And, you know, I want to give them some credit in the past, but also not too much credit because around that election, I think a lot of them were more cognizant of what they needed to do to combat misinformation, but they weren't doing the best job of it. I think some of the best work that they did to keep the platforms from going totally off the rails had to do with combating algorithms that they had that prioritize conspiratorial content. I'm thinking mostly of YouTube, which had recommendations that put the weirdest stuff at the top of your feed. And although that still happens, to their credit, they have taken action against some of the really bonkers stuff. It's harder to find flat Earth accidentally, for example.
Yeah.
But now we're kind of swinging back in that same direction. Twitter has its new For You feed. It's a total rip off of the TikTok For You feed. It's,
Yeah.
guessing what you want to see. Often, our worst impulses do drive what we want to see. We do want to see the weird stuff, the conspiratorial stuff, the stuff that you're clicking on at 2 in the morning. So, I do think we are seeing maybe a bit laxer rules on how things are promoted and distributed on social media.
Yeah, there seems to be sort of like an air of we're really not going to be able to stop this. And maybe it really shouldn't even be our responsibility at the end of the day. That seems to have, I don't know if it started when Musk took over Twitter and kind of spread from there, but there seems to be less of a concern with this, at least among what I'm hearing publicly from many of the platforms.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's sort of a learned helplessness there because I do broadly think that it's true. Social media platforms can't administer away all the conspiratorial thinking. That's a very human drive we have. It's not going to change if Facebook were to vanish off the face of the earth tomorrow. Nor really do I think should they be involved in litigating the minutia of what we share,
Yeah.
but there are very deliberate decisions that some of these social media leaders are taking. Elon Musk, you look at who he interacts with, and these are people who came out of like Gamergate blogs, right? These are former alt-right conspiracy mongers. And so there's a difference between saying, well, maybe we'll be a little bit more libertarian with how we police things. Maybe we'll let things, hang a little bit looser. And Elon Musk going and like sharing the weirdest stuff that you'd normally find on 4chan and, saying, huh, interesting. Anyone looking into that? So, it's they're not completely as helpless as sometimes they portray themselves.
The anti-vax issue has gotten interesting over the last year because over time, the truth about what the vaccines do and don't do for the latest variants has changed. And this is being used by some anti-vaxxers, including those described in a recent Vice Motherboard piece as now wanting revenge, so-called revenge, because they feel that they've been vindicated. This has become a tough one because to take something as simple as, does the vaccine prevent you from getting the virus? When we go back to that first vaccine and the first variant, the data was very clear that it did prevent you from getting and spreading the virus. There were people then saying, no, it doesn't. Over time, as the variants have changed and the vaccine has been updated, it's primarily a tool to prevent you from dying or ending up in the hospital. But now it is a different reality about whether it prevents you from getting the virus. Things have changed in the real world. The anti-vaxxers have been saying the same thing for 3 years. It now more closely lines up with what they were saying all along. That's a really difficult situation to handle.
It's so challenging, and I think it gets at a reason conspiracy theories are so potent. The reason that we can all fall for them is because conspiracy theories, they're something that we activate when we do have uncertainty, when we don't have all the information, when something is frightening in front of us. And conspiracy theories often latch onto a kernel of truth, or at least an emotional truth, right? And the truth here is that the vaccines, they're not perfect. They will keep you out of the hospital. They will make it harder for you to catch and spread, this virus. But like you said, as the virus mutates, vaccines have been, playing catch up. And while it is absolutely a phenomenal idea for people to get their vaccines, get their boosters, it's not going to be the miracle cure that, we were really hoping for. I want to say like summer of 2020. And so anti-vaxxers who, to your point, have always been saying that you can't take the vaccine, it's garbage or it's going to hurt you. They've had to kind of tailor their messaging and say, well, okay, not everybody dropped dead 3 months after getting the vaccine. It's not the zombie apocalypse that we warned about, but it's not working perfectly. And so they take this new reality and they retrofit it onto what they were saying to say, well, you shouldn't have taken the vaccines. And, I think to that point about revenge, they certainly, some of them, I think, do kind of yearn for a future where all their political opponents drop dead because they got the vax.
Yeah. As we've seen the media discussions of COVID more generally reduced, we also seem to see a little bit less about ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine and urine injections or nebulizing or whatever. I'm sure you saw that guy. What is kind of filling the void right now? I mean, I see they're talking more about Hunter Biden laptop, even though that's a different sort of thing. It's not really equivalent to, ivermectin. What new things over the last 6 months are you seeing getting more oxygen?
Well, I think we're seeing a lot of, I hate to say it, but like Republican cope with the 2022 midterms. A lot of people not accepting that their party really didn't sweep the way they expected. So this is going to be a relitigation of 2020 election fraud hoaxes. I'm seeing a good number of environmental conspiracy theories percolating right now. We just had the train derailment in East Palestine. That,
Ah,
of course, was the result of huge bipartisan lapses in labor rights and in transportation laws, and the way that these railroads can lobby. But because this is a frightening situation where it is true, our politicians don't really have the answers. We've seen this void where the right can step in and say that this is a plot against you, either, that they, I don't know, that the left is covering up for this, or that it's a deliberate sabotage of the Midwest, of food supplies. They're really onto that right now. This idea that Democrats are going to nuke Amish country or something like that. So it's I think that's really powerful, and that comes, I think, in side by side with other conspiracy theories right now that are really hitting back at the idea that you should be polluting less. They're really up in arms right now about the idea of the 15-minute city, the idea that you can walk. You don't need a car. You can walk to the things you need: your child's school, the supermarket, and they're calling that a new world order plot to suppress people. So we, I think, are seeing a lot of conspiracy theories that try and fit a more conservative ideology into the reality of this moment where we are facing fraught and frightening environmental reality. So I think that's going to be a trend going forward.
the other one recently has been the quote spy balloon. And of course, I mean, anytime you get anywhere, even remotely close to aliens, all sorts of folks come out of the woodwork. But so I don't know if I can say surprisingly, but somewhat surprisingly, you're seeing some of that come even from marginally more serious people. Like, are we sure that this isn't alien life or whatever the case may be? It ended up being a topic for Biden's press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, talking about it a bunch of times. Has anything surprised you in what we've seen related to the balloons?
Actually, yes. And maybe it speaks to a quaint idea of conspiracy theorists that we still hold, where they're the ones with the tinfoil hats trying to talk to aliens in their backyard. When we got this trending topic, this idea that there were UFOs that we were interacting with, I'm like, okay, well, at least we're going to have some vintage conspiracy theories. We're going to have some aliens. Weirdly enough, people didn't latch on so much to the idea that these were, aliens trying to communicate with us, which it doesn't seem like they were. It was, often hobbyist balloons that were being shot down, but that the balloons were actually a distraction from something else. The balloons
Ah,
were a plot. They were trying to distract you from the East Palestine derailment. They were trying to distract you from reporting on a Russian oil pipeline. So it was really interesting to see the emergence of something that in the past, I think, kind of classic conspiracy fodder, and it wasn't enough in this moment. It wasn't the red meat that conspiracy theorists were looking for.
that's another interesting trait of a lot of these conspiracy theories. Last time you and I talked about how apparent evidence in favor of a conspiracy theory can be just as useful as the absence of evidence, because the absence of evidence becomes part of the conspiracy. So it becomes kind of unfalsifiable. In the same way, an event can be an event you are being lied to and not told the truth about, or the conspiracy can be the event is real, but it's fundamentally a distraction from some other thing. And it's another aspect of the sort of unfalsifiability of a lot of these things.
I think that's absolutely right. One thing that I struggle with as a journalist, I think a lot of journalists have this frustration, is the idea that you'll see it on Facebook. People say, why isn't this being covered? Why isn't this
Oh, yeah,
being
yeah.
covered? And in some respects, I think we do have to take that seriously. If people feel like the reality they're living isn't reflected adequately in the news, I think that is something that we need to take into account. But oftentimes they're saying, why isn't this being covered? And you say, what? And they link to a CNN article. And it
Right.
absolutely blows my mind. But to your point, I think, this idea that you can, you know, touch on the apparent lack of coverage and say that this is indicative of a cover up or this is suggestive of another plot really does show the flexibility of these theories. It allows people to take their perceived uh, the media that they're taking in and say that it's part of a broader plot, that it's part of a broader effort to distract you or to steer you in a certain direction. And I think especially a lot of alternative media folks have really become quite adept at taking what the news media is putting out and saying that it's part of a distraction effort or it's part of a broader scheme.
Yeah, even just the coverage itself, aside from this is the real story or not, or whatever the case may be, if you perceive or claim there isn't coverage, the lack of coverage is part of the conspiracy. And if there's a lot of coverage, then it must be a concerted effort to talk about that as opposed to the thing which really should be discussed. So even the amount of coverage can be used.
Absolutely. Again, it's a real frustration. Ironically, right now today, I am reporting on East Palestine, and someone I'm talking to says, "Yeah, we're getting swamped by grifters on the ground. We've got Benny Johnsons on the ground who are running around filming videos." And look, I think fundamentally there does need to be a lot of aid there. I think people are rightly happy to be getting donations and stuff like that, but you it's very easy to turn these things into a circus over the amount of perceived coverage or lack thereof, or
Yeah.
people's imputed agendas, when what's really going on is an environmental crisis with, a pretty traceable backstory as to how it happened.
Yeah, even as I receive emails from people saying it's not getting coverage, I'm realizing everybody's emailing me about the fact that it's not getting coverage. It's on CNN, it's on Fox News, it's in the Washington Post, New York Times, alternative media. The story about the coverage seems to take on a life of its own.
It really does. And I could speculate a couple reasons why. One is, I think, regardless of political orientation, I think we do have an ambient anxiety about the environment. We know something's up, and then you see something just as shocking as that big gray plume of smoke, and that really grabs attention.
Yeah.
I think, the East Palestine derailment also speaks to a sort of forgotten class narrative that I think the right has become very adept at wielding without actually addressing the underlying issues. Um, Trump went to East Palestine just this week when we're speaking, and he understands that that is, predominantly white working collar community that does often constitute his base. And even though some of the solutions that could help that community, immediate donations now, but also, longer term investments in social programs that would help and that are very often progressive or liberal programs. It's having a town like that at the heart of such a striking incident. It does kind of feed into this idea that these are people who are being left behind in a way that
Right.
conservatives can help, but liberals can't.
That's a really interesting interpretation as well, which makes a lot of sense. The book is now in paperback, Off the Edge: Flat Earthers, Conspiracy Culture, and Why People Will Believe Anything. We've been speaking with the book's author, reporter at the Daily Beast, Kelly Weill. Kelly, always appreciate your time and insights.
Thank you so much for having me.